before I begin, for those who don't know who I am, my name is Muchaneta to Napel, which has recently changed. It used to be Kapfunda, but I got married, so I decided to change it. I have been working in the fashion industry for about 15 years. I changed about, 5, 6 years ago and started working in fashion innovation. So what I basically do is that I write about innovation for the fashion industry so they can better understand all the changes that are taking place. I also contribute at Vogue Business, and I write as a senior contributor for the Interline. I'm also very excited that I actually also lecture at London College of Fashion. And the reason why I love lecturing there, because it's so great to be able to introduce students to a new future, because a lot of them are learning the more older ways of doing business in fashion. So for me, it's really exciting to see their faces when I say to them, look at this material, it's made out of mushroom. Or look at this material, it's made out of pineapple, because that excites them. So I love lecturing students, and I also work as a fashion innovation consultant. And what that basically means is that I go in and I work with fashion brands, and I introduce them to different types of technology. My goal is not to make them adopt technology. My goal is to make sure they adopt the right technology, because not every innovation is made for every brand. When it comes to new materials, I'm sure most of you are very much aware that there's a lot going on. I've been in this space for about 6 to 7 years, so I've seen a lot from, let's say, 2014 to where we are now in 2022. The good news is that a lot of brands are starting to adopt various types of materials. The bad news, in my opinion, is that fashion industry is still not doing enough to support new materials. You know, if you look at other industries such as the sports industry, if you even look at the military even, they are always looking at different ways that they can go forward as an industry. But unfortunately with fashion, they do take a little bit of convincing. But I'm hopeful. This word sustainability, some people love it, some people hate it, some people don't understand it. The problem with that word, in my opinion, is that everyone's level of sustainability is very different. What I might consider sustainable, you might not consider sustainable. So when it comes to it being a driver, various brands are committing only to a certain level because that's what they consider to be sustainable. And that's why I think it's super important that the EU is starting to get involved. And the legislation is starting to come into place because we all need to have our nose in the same direction. I love the fact that new materials are being re-engineered. And I also love it even more that a lot of people that are doing this are not from the fashion industry. A lot of the problem solvers are coming from engineers and scientists, people who can kind of see the problem and find a solution by using new materials. This is very important because a lot of the fashion industry are so connected to the materials that they're using today that we need somebody to come in and say, hey guys, what about this one? And I love that idea. And that's when collaboration comes into kind of play here, because a lot of the industry are not very familiar with all the innovation and technology. It's moving at such a fast pace that it's super hard for people to keep up. So what's important is about collaborating with these engineers and scientists. Pushing boundaries. How many of you have actually seen some of the new materials? Hands up. Anyone seen them? Or you just hear about it and never really see it? We've got a few hands up. That's good. I think one of the big problems is that I stand up here on stage and I tell you, there's new materials, you need to use them. But none of you have ever really seen or touched or felt. So we need these type of materials to be out there so people can actually experience them, touch them, sample them. Because right now, I can tell you something is made out of pineapple, but I sound like the boogeyman up here. You'd be like, pineapple, how does that work? So I think one of the things that's lacking in the space is education and actually providing these materials for the brands to be able to touch, feel, look at, and try and understand how this material can replace the ones they currently use. There are alternatives out here. This image here that I used, I love it. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of orange fiber. Anyone heard of orange fiber? Great, that's good to see. They did a collaboration with Salvatore Ferragamo, and when I spoke to them, I convinced them to showcase their material here at Munich Fabric Start about 3 seasons or 4 seasons ago. And the first thing that people did when they saw that material was smell it, because it's made out of orange peel waste. And your natural thing is like, oh, it's made out of oranges. Will it smell of oranges? And it didn't, of course, naturally. But what I love about orange fiber is that they're not only using 10% orange peel waste, they're using, I think it's about nearly 100% of orange peel waste. And this is very important, because a lot of these new materials might say, oh, we're using pineapple, but it's like 10% pineapple and then 90% of other crap. So you always have to ask that question. How sustainable is it really? And how much of that new material that you speak of is actually in that product? Is it 100%, 90%, 2%? Because that's very important. Because there's a lot of greenwashing going on when it comes to new textiles. There's a lot of startups out there trying to rope you in, get you excited over something that isn't really sustainable. What I want to introduce to you today are a few key players that have kind of come on my radar in the last 12 months and who are doing some really great stuff. Some of them, you might have heard of them already. Others might be new. I think it's important to introduce you to them so you can kind of have a starting point when it comes to researching further. I'm going to play the videos and then I'll have a conversation with you after that. And if you can hear that.
Our planet is in trouble. We are right in the middle of a major climate crisis. The textile industry consumes about 100 million tons of new fibers per year. About 90% of textile fibers at the end of life go straight into a waste stream. They're either going to incineration or they're going to landfill. That's a dramatic loss of useful material because the fibers in textile garments are perfectly good at the end of life. The world has many more clothes than it needs at the moment. Something like 25% of clothing bought is never ever worn, sits in wardrobes, and after a few years is put into a waste stream. Recycling in the fashion industry has never really taken off.
Most of the garments, they are a mixture of different materials, composites and components. And the challenge is how to separate at the end of life. Sewing thread is part of this challenge as it is designed to last. But this durability, although is very much desired during the lifespan of a garment, it's also a problem when it comes to recycling. The dismantle process now is manual, is labor intensive and it's costly. EcoCycle is a range of water-dissolvable threads to facilitate easy and low-cost disassembly of a garment. The seams with EcoCycle are strong and durable during the lifespan of a garment, and at the end of life, when this garment is ready to be recycled, it should be washed at 95 degrees Celsius for the seams to dissolve and to remove any non-textile components. This didn't happen overnight. EcoCycle it's a completely new concept, and as such, we are doing a lots of trials during manufacturing process just to ensure that the product is fit for purpose. Coats is willing to collaborate and work together with brands, with the garment manufacturers and with recyclers to ensure that the right threads are being used and the right processes are being followed. Only that way we can truly embrace circularity.
As an industry, we are responsible for up to 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions globally, and that means that no solution to the climate crisis can ignore the textile industry. Consumers and governments are beginning to realize that actually industry should have a responsibility to its products for their whole life cycle. The brands which address that will do well. The brands which don't will struggle.
The reason why I included this particular company was because they talk a lot about end of life. A lot of people, when they think about products made out of certain textiles, they don't think about what would happen after I finish wearing this dress. Is this recyclable? What can I do with it? Do I just kind of give it back to the shop and they dump it in a corner in some box? What do I need to do with my garments? And I think it's super important when it comes to new textiles and new materials that this is part of the DNA of material designers, to not only think about whether this material is durable, whether this material kind of has the properties that brands want, but also to think about what is the afterlife? Can it be repaired? Can it be recycled? And if it can be recycled, how can it be recycled? And in my opinion, this is where digital ID comes into play. The idea of providing information about a garment, ingredients, if you will, is very important. But digital ID, that's another conversation. But I think it's something that I kind of had to mention.
Leather is known for being one of the most environmentally damaging textiles. Both the CO2 and the water footprints, they're just off the chart. The plastic alternatives, they have a lower CO2 footprint, but then we have the plastic waste problem. And there's like surprisingly little regulation. You know, food companies need to disclose, you know, by law what's in the food, but material companies don't. And so we don't know what we're surrounding ourselves with. I was an art and creative director, actually working with a lot of fashion brands. We didn't know the massive impact it had. Then I had my daughter Nora, and my perspective changed a lot. And I really started to think about there are some huge problems in the world and some really, really big challenges. And I was thinking like, okay, but I'm a designer, I'm not a scientist. How can I help? I've always been really interested in natural things like leaves and bark, and I tend to like pick up these things. Also, sometimes I want to sketch them. So I started thinking about this raw, natural material that's all around us. I was thinking about how we could turn this into a natural plastic-free material that would both be recyclable and biodegradable. So the system was almost already in place before the material was. I kind of knew what I wanted it to be before I even knew that it could work. Many hundreds of samples later, here we are. We have invented a plant-based leather alternative that's called Treekind. What's special about it is that it's made with green waste, agricultural waste, forestry waste. It all works in our formulation. And there's absolutely no plastic in our material. And obviously no plastic means no microfiber. It's really low resource. Also, it is recyclable and biodegradable, both in soil and water. So no matter where it ends up, it doesn't cause any problems or harm. I think that we're at this amazing intersection of nature and science and design, where if people could create all of these amazing types of plastics, what can we produce when we put our minds to using plant-derived raw materials? Humans are amazing, and I really think we can do this.
She is not the only person to be turning to nature for the solution. A lot of startups that have kind of gone forward in the last 5 years have looked at nature, how nature is able to kind of grow, blossom, and then kind of go back into earth. And I think it's such a great idea to do that with leather, because leather, it's something that people are trying to not wear as much anymore, but we still need it. So how can we find alternatives? What would make sense? I actually hesitate about including this video and I'll tell you why. I think a lot, when it comes to new materials, there's a lot of PR marketing, very green marketing type of videos out there, and they kind of shiny and new, and they glisten and they glitter, and they kind of pull us in and make us feel like, this is the way forward. This is the material I should really invest in. But some of them actually, that one says 90%, but you also have to be aware that there's certain questions that you need to ask before you invest. What is the percentage of recycled materials? What kind of natural materials are you using? Where is it manufactured? What's the durability of this new material? Don't accept this at face value. Yes, it's glittery and nice, and they made handbags and they made things out of it, but you still need to investigate and find out if it is what you want. Because there's a lot of green marketing, and I come from a fashion PR marketing background, so I know, I'm not going to say it, but I know kind of bullshit when I see it. So this is great and everything, but always still have your questions is kind of my learning point there.
My name is Sarika Bajaj.
I'm Tashida Gupta.
I'm Ida Wang.
And we are the co-founders of Refiberd. In May of 2020, the three of us came together, all with different engineering backgrounds, to solve a problem in sustainability in the textile industry. Over 93 million tons of textile waste are generated each year, and less than 1% of that waste is recycled into new clothing. If you look further at the supply chain, we also find out that over 50% of all environmental impact comes from raw materials. Now, you have all of this textile waste, you have this huge problem with raw materials. You would think, why isn't recycling happening today in the world? And we discovered very quickly that it's a materials problem. If you don't properly know what materials are in the textile waste, they can't be efficiently recycled. And that's exactly the problem that Refiberd set out to solve.
And this is how Refiberd works. We source post-consumer waste from existing textile collection companies. We then perform color sorting using AI and robotics to preserve dye color. Our next step is shredding. We do this to solve the multi-layered garment problem. When we shred the material, we create a homogeneous mixture which can easily be detected by spectroscopy. We use spectroscopy and AI to sort the material by its fiber composition, and the sorted material is then put into our chemical recycling process.
The chemical process starts with isolating materials, specifically cellulose and polyester. They are then dissolved and extruded separately into 100% recycled thread. Through our process, we are able to recycle up to 93% of material out of the textile waste stream and retain 80% dye color of the material.
We are using spectroscopy and AI to produce 100% recycled thread that can re-enter the textile supply chain. Please join us in our effort to solve the $100 billion global textile waste crisis.
So there are scientists that I spoke of earlier. A lot of the problem solvers are like these ladies over here where they see a problem in the fashion or the textile industry and they find a way of solving it.
I'm Tashida Gupta.
There we go, move on to the next one.
When you design a material, I think the old school thought process is, let's optimize for price. That's the only thing you focus on, and at all costs, right? You use whatever materials you can, you try to do it cheaply, and that's the goal. At my previous company, we were working with materials that scientifically were very interesting, but some of them were toxic, some of them were caustic, some were sensitizing. There are a lot of issues. A lot of chemists deal with materials that can be harmful to themselves, the environment. We were so focused on hitting physical properties that we weren't really paying much attention to, hey, what happens to this product after it's finished its life cycle? I love being outdoors. I love, surfing, hiking, skiing, climbing, just being outside and being around nature. And my background is material science, so I came at it from a material science angle and thought, hey, well, wouldn't it be great if we could have a material that, again, performs like a polyester or a nylon, but didn't have the same environmental impact as those materials? I had packed up my van and I had car camped all the way across the country, went through a bunch of national parks and just had this rinse, went through nature and like rinsed myself of my previous life, so to speak. And I just remember getting to Brooklyn and found a lab space. Kintra, the company that I started, is a material science-based company. A lot of synthetic clothing, even natural clothing, is made up of what's called a polymer. So we're developing a new polymer that looks and feels like a synthetic material, but it comes from renewable resources like sugars. We're also designing the material to be compostable, which is something that is kind of a novel concept in the fashion industry. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to combat microfiber pollution. So we're focusing specifically on the melt spinning process, which is the #1 way to turn a synthetic polymer into a synthetic fiber. It's basically like a giant spaghetti machine. We've started to make batches in the 50 kilo range, which gives us access to more scaled up equipment, and we can start to test the feasibility of this stuff at scale, which is a very, very important thing to do. Customers are starting to demand more from their brands. The brands are hungry for new materials because that helps them connect with their customers. I think more and more people are going to start realizing how valuable that is because, frankly, the planet's ability to survive depends on it.
I mean, I kind of love the fact, like I said earlier, that these kind of scientists and engineers are helping us solve a problem. But I think when it comes to materials in general, I'm sure most of you are probably thinking, oh, this is great, but what next? I think it all comes down to understanding as well that scaling these new materials is still a big, big problem on top of the price as well. But I truly believe that if the industry was to commit and put money where their mouth is kind of thing, that we will be able to actually support these type of initiatives, bring these new textiles to the forefront, introduce them to the industry. But until we're able to do that, the chances are most of this materials will just remain in the lab until they can be scaled. So I wanted to end with this quote, which says, remember the age of new materials is not about innovation for tomorrow, because the future is now. And the reason why I say this, because a lot of, whenever I talk about innovation on stage, it all sounds very Jetsons, very future, like it's happening in 5, 10 years' time. When actually it's happening right now, and it's been happening for years. The only problem is we have not been educating the industry correctly until more recently. And by the fact that we're not educating someone, they're not going to adopt it. And that's pretty much a hard fact. We can't tell an industry to change their ways, to rewire the way of thinking without giving them the tools and the knowledge to do so. So I'm a firm believer in educate yourself, find out what's going on, make sure that you ask all the right questions. And, because a lot of people claim to be sustainable, it's very easy for me to tempt you with stuff that isn't even what it says. Ask those questions, and once you ask those questions, then ask for a sample and have that conversation. What's key in the end is collaboration. We don't know it all. I definitely don't know it all. But one thing I'm always a big fan of is collaborating and working together. Thank you so much.